Okay, this is another part of the theses that I read yesterday on the natural born eunuch. Uh, there's several theses that I want to read because this will solidify everything together for you, I think. Um, and so Born Eunuchs is a home page, okay? And then they have this one is entitled The Historic Origins of Church Condemnation of Homosexuality. So I just thought I would just read it and, and then I would, read some other ones too. So, okay, here it goes. On May 14th, 390, an imperial decree was posted at a Roman hall of Minerva, a gathering place for actors, writers, and artists, which criminalized for the first time the sexual practice of those whom we call homosexual men. This had never happened before in the history of law. The prescribed penalty was death by burning. This law was promulgated by an emperor who at the time was under a penance set by St. Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan. And the law was issued in the context of a persecution of heresies. Homosexual men at the imperial court had been powerful opponents of Catholic doctrine during the 4th century conflicts over the nature of Jesus Christ, known as the Arian controversies. Prior to 390, both religious and secular law had targeted only one particular form of homosexuality. When a man or youth who was otherwise exhibited as a virile attraction towards women nonetheless agreed to or was forced to play a female role in intercourse with other men. For example, biblical law against homosexual acts calls it an abomination and a prescribed death as a punishment when a man lies with a male the way one lies with a woman. Meanwhile, only heterosexually oriented men, including bisexual men, would properly be called male, since potency with women was a primary proof of masculinity. August Caesar's law against adultery likewise prohibited intercourse with males, and may well have provided the impetus for a widely attested wave of castrations in the early empire, in order to supply sex partners who were not male. As late as 342, Constantinus II issued a decree imposing an exquisite punishment for the crime which occurs when a male gives himself in marriage to an effeminate fema, literally a woman, and what he wants is for the effeminate to play the male role in sex, literally project the male parts, thus for himself to play the female role. Men lacking desire for or potency with women, like today's homosexual man, were never intended by these laws. They would not have been deemed, on the whole, to be male. Maleness implied playing the role of penetrator and procreator. Those who did not failed to meet the ancient criteria for being called male. One could say that the very concept of masculinity or virility was defined throughout the ancient Mediterranean, not in contrast to women, but to homosexual men. An innumerable loci can be adduced to show that exclusively homosexual men were called non-male, half-male, neither male nor female, androgynous, or a third sex, but never male. It is very little known fact that there was a category of men in the ancient Mediterranean who were called natural or constitutional eunuchs. It is even less known that these eunuchs are defined by early 3rd century Roman laws as having no physical defects. At most, they had a particular mental orientation, and they were eventually what we would call born homosexuals. In the laws, they are differentiated from castrated men and others who do have physical defects. Natural eunuchs were entitled to marry women, adopt, and bequeath property since there was no bodily defect present as an impediment to that, while castrated men were prohibited from doing all of these things. Nonetheless, Juvenal had found that when a eunuch marries a woman, it's hard not to write satire. For a more detailed discussion of the definition of natural eunuchs, see another article on the subject on this same website. Okay, as you guys know, I was sent this by one of my subscribers, Truth Seeker. And so I'll get into that later. Sorry. From early Babylon down to the late Roman Empire, eunuchs had played two major roles in ancient society: as priests in pagan temples, as domestic servants in wealthy households and royal palaces. Thus, eunuchs had a tradition of spirituality and of being close to power. In the 4th century, this combination made them a great help to bishops whom they supported and a potent threat to those whom they opposed. The eunuch by the name of Eusebius, the Grand Chamberlain of the Byzantine palace under Constantine, and then under his son Constantius, was considered to wield virility, imperial power due to his ability to control access to the emperor, especially during the son's reign. I'm not saying this right. Eusebius, Eusebius, was an active proponent of the Arian doctrine, which held that the Almighty God was not the father of Jesus in a procreative sense, notwithstanding the virgin birth, but rather that God adopted Jesus as his son through grace. In his history of the Arians, Saint Athanasius, it's not my language, a virulent advocate of the Catholic doctrine, recounted Eusebius's mission to Rome, allegedly to bribe and threaten the Pope Liberius into accepting communion with Arian Christians. Afterwards, he summed it up. Now, I just want to insert that I don't believe all of this is not my belief, okay? This is just, I'm just reading this basically to give you more of an idea about who, were eunuchs and what they had to go through and so forth. And why and what have you. And so that you can see why when Jesus said what he said in Matthew 19:11 and 12, why it's so important, okay, to the LGBT community. It was the eunuchs who instigated these proceedings against all pressure tactics against the Nicene Christians in various cities. And the most remarkable circumstance is the matter is this, that the Arian heresy, which denied the Son of God, receives its support from eunuchs who, as both their bodies are fruitless and their souls barren of the seeds of virtue, cannot bear even to hear the name of the Son. The eunuchs of the Constantinus cannot endure the confession of Peter, Matthew 16:16. Nay, they turn away when the Father manifests the Son, and madly rage against those who say the Son of God is his genuine Son, thus claiming as a heresy of eunuchs that there is no genuine and true offspring of the Father. Regardless of what homosexual Christians may feel today about Jesus' status as God, it is clear that in the 4th century there were identified as powerful enemies of the Catholic doctrine. This is not the place to examine the merits of official church doctrine, to discuss whether Jesus was more or less like other human beings, or whether the male role in the procreative act can properly be attributed to God. Suffice it to say, the early supporters of the Nicene Creed saw homosexual men as dangerous rivals. Now, in addition to being spiritual authorities and palace servants, eunuchs had a traditional role as sexual passives because they were not male. This behavior was legal in both pagan and biblical law throughout all prior history. A sympathetic historian in the time of Constantinus II noted that the emperor himself was sexually devoted to his eunuchs, courtiers, and wives, and while content with these, he recognized homosexual marriage as long as it didn't involve a male partner in a passive role. Remember that this decree was issued in a period when palace eunuchs were powerful and influential in the imperial court. The gender of the eunuchs until the 4th century was typically described as it is in Lucian's dialogue, The Eunuch, neither man nor woman, but something composite, hybrid, and monstrous, alien to human nature, or as Aristotle's assertion that eunuchs fall but little short of the idea of female, or in Pliny's categorization of eunuchs alongside hermaphrodites, hermaphrodites and castrae, sorry, I'm butchering that, as a third gender. However, by the early 4th century, the first signs appear of an expansion of the definition of masculinity to include eunuchs. Okay. The Firmus Materius, as an astrologer, Christian convert, eunuchs are males without seed who cannot copulate, obscene, disreputable, filthy, lewd passives. The point being that he calls them males, something writers in the prior centuries had never done. At the same time, we notice the definition of eunuch is beginning to shrink. In the early 3rd century, Clement of Alexandria had defined the eunuch as one not unable but unwilling to have sex. Basilides, quoted by Clement, had defined the born eunuch of Matthew 19:12 as the person who, from their birth, have a nature to turn away from women, and those who are naturally so constituted to will not to marry. Okay? Now in the 4th century, Epiphanes of Salamis claimed the born eunuchs are incapable of doing anything sexual because they lack the divinely created organs of generation, and they get no credit or heavenly reward for their abstination from sex, for they have not done the thing not because they didn't want to, because they couldn't. Therefore, they have no experience of the struggle. Committing the sin is physically impossible for them. Nonetheless, they have felt desires, and that is a flat reversal of Clements and Basilides' comments. The reduction of the eunuch status to a physical defect is but one of the churchman's tactic. However, superseding all others with a general 4th century ecclesiastical strategy to deprive physical whole, natural eunuchs, i.e. homosexual men, of their religious credibility. Gregory Nassianzen adopted a different rhetoric means towards the same end. In his case, he admitted that the natural eunuchs lacked desire to procreate, but like Epiphanes, Gregory too denied them credit for their abstinence because it was natural for them and had not resulted from a fierce internal struggle. Rather than abstain from procreation, Gregory instead called on Christian natural eunuchs to avoid prostituting themselves and thus dishonoring Christ. I'm going to stop it right here and continue on.